All right, welcome
Oops.
everyone to Chicago Autism Network's virtual parent workshops. We are Chicago Autism Network. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families find and afford effective autism therapy and supports. Before we get officially started, I just want to share a couple of announcements. Next October's workshop is going to be with a social worker who's going to talk to us about supportive parenting through anxious childhood emotions. So, learning how we can best support our kids in their anxiety and promote calming and just whole wellness. I do also want to announce that our therapy assistance grants are open. You can apply online at chicagoautismnetwork.org/grants. And the applications this year are in both English and Spanish, all on the same application. So feel free to share those or fill those out. They're due back by October 1st. And to help us raise money for the therapy assistance grant program, we are having our gala on September 19th at Loft on Lake, which is in West Loop. It's a lovely location. We have great food, an open bar, music, wonderful company. We have some fantastic raffle and auction prizes. So it's just a good time in support of the autism community. We hope you can come. You can check it out at chicagoautismnetwork.org/fundraisers. And I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. Our platinum sponsors are Bluebird Day, Chicago Pediatric Therapy and Wellness Center, CST Academy, Leap Forward, Lumiere Children's Therapy, North Shore
Yay.
Pediatric Therapy, Progressive Behavior Solutions, Stride Autism Centers, and Strive ABA Consultants. We are so grateful to have 9 platinum sponsors this year. Our silver sponsors are Brighter Care ABA, IS Landing, and ICG Rehab. If you would like to support us in this and can't make it to our gala, you can always visit chicagoautismnetwork.org/donate. And sorry, my lights are a little funky and they go on and off sometimes. If I just black out every once in a while, that's what's going on. But anyway, I will turn the time over to Mo.
All right. Thank you so much. And sounds like you've got a lot of amazing things going on, and what incredible sponsors. I was like clapping for all of them because I'm like, I know them. They're great. I know them. They're great. Um, so great job on getting them involved. So today we're going to do a training about IEPs, right? So I want to help you guys be the best advocates possible, because you will be their advocate for their whole educational career. So, real quick about me, I have been in the field for 34 years. So, I love to joke that I obviously started when I was 4, because I couldn't possibly be older than that. Um, but one of my kind of biggest jobs that really gave me the most experience, knowledge, and training was when I was the director of autism for and intellectual disabilities for Chicago Public Schools. So I was there for 17 years, but now I own my own advocacy company and consulting and presenting, and it's the best thing I ever did. So that's just a little bit about me. So when we talk about our IEP, right, that's that legal document. And I love to stress it's a legal document, because sometimes I'll have people say, I can't believe she spell checked it or something like that to me. Or I'm like, it's a legal document. So yes, if you see something spelled wrong, if we really want it to be a very robust, accurate document. So definitely always speak up. But it's written to address those unique individual needs of every individual student that has a disability and was found eligible for needing services, right? It kind of maps out your supports and services. I use this name. People don't use it in the field, but I call it's the prescription of education, because it really is. Like, if you think about a prescription from a doctor, it is individual. Like, my prescription for like a sleep med would be different than yours, based on many factors. So I think of an IEP as that prescription of education. So the law says it has to happen at least once a year. It has to be updated. Two little things about that. One is it can happen more often, and I'll tell you the reasons why in a couple of slides. And the other is an IEP never expires, meaning this. I've had schools tell a parent, like, if they couldn't make the meeting, or if you were, for example, at a therapeutic school and then wanted to come back to CPS or anywhere you're coming, that last IEP, whatever the last IEP is, stays into effect until a new one is put in its place. Um, Granted, things would have changed and stuff, but at least you're never losing your services. It stays in place until a new one gets put in its place. Um, so when I talked about it can happen more than once a year, and these are some of the reasons. So anybody can request an IEP meeting. You as a parent, the teacher, the case manager, a therapist at the school, related service provider. So some of the reasons you might have more than one a year is they're not really making progress, right? They are making progress and they're mastering ahead of time, or there's something new going on. So those are pretty much the things that would like trigger a somebody should be requesting an IEP meeting. Now, here's the little sad thing about the state of Illinois. In Illinois, if a parent requests an IEP meeting, all that's required by law is for the district to respond to the request in 10 calendar days. But the response can be yes, sure, or no, thank you. Um, so the reasons why I've found if someone says no is we've already had four this year, or there's absolutely no new deaths. But I rarely get a no, but just if they say no, they do have to give you a reason, but they can. They only have to respond within 10 calendar days. I always have to tell this one because I feel so bad when a parent says, and guess what? I didn't sign that IEP. I don't agree with it. In the state of Illinois, a signature is only for attendance purposes. So whether you sign it or not, it has no relevance on the implementation of it. So if you're there and say, I'm not signing this IEP, that once the IEP is done, it's going to be implemented unless you evoke one of your procedural safeguards, which we can talk about here in a little bit. But just know that the whole I'm not going to sign it has no bearings on and anything in the IEP in the state of Illinois. Other states are different. There is a regulation in the state of Illinois that says parents must have meaningful participation. So some of the ways that the state says that happens is they have to give you a form that has everyone's name that the district is inviting and their titles, the specific function of the meeting. Is it an IEP review? Is it an eligibility? Is it a domain? Is it an FBA behavior plan? So those are required 10 days in advance. Um, the regulation actually says it needs to be a mutually agreed upon time and date. So this is really difficult when a school says, "Oh, our team day is Tuesdays." That's not an accurate statement. Would they hope more often than not people do it on a Tuesday? Yeah, if that's their team day. But in the reality is the law does say it has to be mutually agreed upon. So what if Tuesday is the only day you work or the only day you can't get off? Meetings being virtual a lot. I still do all my IEP meetings virtual. It makes it easier to like if for example I'm the speech therapist there on Tuesday, but they mutually agreed upon time is Thursday. I might be at a different school, but now that I can join virtually, it should be easier for us to all just know it has to be mutually agreed upon time and date. So never feel bad about saying that time doesn't work, that date doesn't work. Are allowed to do in person, over the phone, or virtual. I've had schools tell parents, like, you have to come in person. Not a true statement. Um, and this is before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were supposed to allow a platform in which works for all parties. So then this is the newer thing. It's maybe a couple years old. For CPS, it's more like 5 years old. For the rest of the state, it's 3 years old. But a draft of the IEP and all data, assessment results, any information that they use to develop the draft must be sent to parents 3 full school days in advance of the meeting. So I'm couple points on that is it's 3 school days. And I put the word full in because here's what I think of. When we have a meeting on Thursday and they email you the draft Monday at like 4 o'clock, you're really only getting 2 days, right, to review it. So I actually talked to the state because I put in a state complaint once and they said, well, it was Monday, you got it. And I said, okay, then let me ask you a question. If this same parent dropped off her kid at school at 4 o'clock, would he be called absent or present? Right? Absent because he missed a full school day. So since it says school, um, all right, let me get back on the slideshow and you tell me if you can see everything. Thanks. Um, I thought I was on the hotspot. I was on the building's internet, so that's why it must
Ah,
have done that. I'm so sorry.
no
So
problem.
on this slide, where would you like me to reiterate?
So I feel like, and everyone else can chime in too, but I feel like we got through most of it.
Okay.
It was just
I
kind of you were elaborating on one of the points that it.
okay, right at the
Yeah.
end about, oh, and now a police car. Boy, I'm just having the worst luck.
You're
I
good.
So the most important thing is those minutes of service. So not only are the minutes of any service not supposed to be in there, but even if you're in CPS section 7 relevant transition information, it shouldn't say and he will be in co-taught blah 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 or he will be pulled out for that's the same thing as putting minutes in. That's called predetermination, which is actually a legal violation. So we always want to make sure that those aren't in there. And I know a lot of parents, it's like a bummer because they kind of want to know what's the school thinking? What are they going to recommend? But the reason why it's a legal violation is because the the supports and services that are outlined in there are supposed to then have a conversation with everyone, including the parents, about how do we then provide those services. And you're really supposed to talk about the least restrictive first. So could this be implemented in gen ed with all of these accommodations with all of these services? Could we do that? Would we need some pull out? Would we need so that whole thing is really supposed to be a robust conversation and it oftentimes is not, especially for those poor kiddos that are in cluster program. It's kind of like it just is like, and he'll remain in the program and he'll remain in the program. So we never have that conversation of what will it take to get to a less restrictive environment, which I'll show you in a slide coming up here in a few, which can help with that. Other ways for parents to have meaningful participation is if you need an interpreter, please ask. And just so you know, you can request that it's not somebody at the table doing another role. Like they might say, oh, our speech therapist can interpret. You want the people at the table focusing on their job. The law does provide you to say, I need it to be someone that's not doing another role at the table. Um, so the other ones are kind of just reiterating, the meaningful participation, the mutually agreed upon time. So this last one is interesting. So if you're in CPS, in section 7, the very last thing is parent. It actually says parent concerns, but it's really supposed to be parent concerns and input. When you hear concerns, if they say, parents, do you have any concerns? Well, that has like a negative kind of vibe to it. So a lot of times parents will say, no, and then they move on. Or they'll say, you can email that to me afterwards. No, actually, I recommend parents draft your input and concerns prior because the law says that everything in this section, parent input and concerns, needs to be somehow addressed in the IEP. Doesn't mean they have to do what the parent is asking, but somehow needs to be addressed. And usually you find that in the notes section. So let's say the parent says, I believe my child needs 120 minutes of speech, pull out private, I mean, this whole thing. And they're like, well, we are only able to provide 30 minutes, whatever they say. They have to document somewhere whether it's in that section or in the IEP notes section, parents requesting 120 minutes of speech per week. And we discussed the rationale why we're not recommending that based on, and they have to really they really have to what's called like consider it. They can't just, I think the biggest red flag is when they're like, you can email me those later. Well, that means your consideration really wasn't taken into account in the development of that IEP. So procedural safeguards. I I can't see your faces right now, and I wouldn't embarrass anyone, but how many people have actually read them? I say read them. I can't tell you how many educators have not read them. Like, I'll have educators say to me, "Well, how many days for stay put for requesting requesting a due process or requesting mediation?" I'm like, "They have 10 days." And they're like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "It's in your procedural safeguards." So I recommend reading them, really truly reading them. You should get a new copy at least one time a year. It's at minimum, that's what they say. You only, even if you have like 10 meetings, technically they only have to give it to you once a year. And I would say every year read it because they often update them. I think the last time they updated them was 2 years ago. So I don't know, maybe this coming year they might be updating them again. And those are from the state and the feds. So this is not like a CPS thing or a school district thing. These are like state procedural safeguards. So definitely read them. Oh, this is just just an FYI. And at just an IEP meeting, a revision IEP, whatever, you can never change the label name. So the eligibility cannot be changed in an IEP, nor can a new service be added. So at an IEP meeting, if your child never got speech, even if the whole team is like, oh, he totally needs speech, you can't do it in an IEP meeting. Those two things can only happen at an eligibility meeting, which means you opened up a domain and you said, what are the relevant areas that we need to assess? And what are we going to do to assess that? Sign consent, then they do the whatever the additional relevant stuff was, and then they re-meet to say, we determined yes, based on this assessment results, he does indeed need speech, or we determined, you know what, you're right, he does actually have autism. It's not DD or whatever it is. So the only time those can change is an eligibility meeting. Some people call them the evaluation meetings. So just know that. Um, that draft. So I have this little trick I do with drafts with parents. I say take two different color highlighters. And, I used to always actually print them and tell parents to print them. But now that like computer PDFs really are, you can use a highlighter tool. So you can still highlight them electronically. But I say take two different highlighters, read the draft, and highlight one color about just things you have questions about, like, what is this? Or what does this mean? And then use a different highlighter on things that you see differently, like maybe at home or maybe with a tutor, and you're like, whoa, that does not seem accurate. Doesn't mean it's not accurate, but it's so relevant to bring up. And then again, right, I think writing those concerns and input ahead of time is super helpful. So that's my advice with the draft. Don't just skim it. I would actually read it. Um, and then you're so much more prepared. Now in CPS it's section 7, but every IEP system, even if you're not in CPS, has this section that's called present levels or general consideration or plop or plof. It's hilarious. They have all kinds of different names, but it's the meat and the beginning of every IEP. This section drives everything else. It drives your services, it drives your supports. So if I were to focus on anything, this making sure accurate is this section. It provides that like basis for like what we're doing, why we're doing it, what are their individual needs. And it's really how are we going to move this child forward to be like a awesome, successful member of society post high school, right? So I would say it's kind of the foundation of the IEP. And it's created by the entire team, and you are part of the team. And really, when you think about the importance of it too, is you can't really know how far you've gone if you don't know where you started, right? So that's kind of like the here and now. It's so important. And this is what I say when I train teachers, but I think it's good for you guys to know too, is when you write an IEP, you write it as if the student is moving tomorrow. Because I say it that way to say, I want it to be so detailed and so accurate that if I'm the new teacher tomorrow, I go, okay, I understand how this child learns. I understand what their needs are. I understand what areas I'm going to focus on. So I really think that that's kind of an important mentality when, because a lot of times schools will write things like the way they know it, like, oh, yeah, I know what that means. Well, guess what? You can quit tomorrow. You can be fired tomorrow. I can move tomorrow. So, really, and it's a legal document. So, the more detail and the more accuracy and the more, yeah, specific information, the better. So this section, I'm talking a lot about it because it does drive everything. So it really starts out with the strengths, right? But sometimes people think it's just for the teacher. It's really for everyone. If the child's getting speech, there should be strengths from the speech therapist, from the OT, from any gen ed, from the parents. And I love to include motivators here. We know a lot of children on the spectrum benefit from like that whole first work, then something when and it's really great if we know what really motivates the child. What's their paycheck, right? Is it a koosh ball? Is it a walk break? Is it listening to a story? Is it Google searching trains? Whatever it is, I love to add those in strengths. Um, and then the next area is the academic needs. Often I'll look at an IEP and it'll only say like ELA and math, but it really should include all four core academics because even if the child's only getting pulled out special ed wise or pushed in special ed wise for math and ELA, they're obviously still requiring supports for science and social studies, even if it's just accommodations. So you really should have something about all four core academics. The preferred learning style is kind of a CPS thing. I've never seen a suburban district have that. Oftentimes for children with autism, it's a visual learner, but it doesn't always have to be. The problem with this section is there's typically no formal kind of like way they're figuring it out. They're either doing it based on the disability label of like, oh, they have autism, they're a visual learner. Um, but so I don't put a ton of weight on this section unless they're actually doing some kind of a survey or self-assessment to find out the learning style. But this is, you can chime in as well. You could say, oh no, I know my child actually, if I write something down, he doesn't, but if I say it, he really listens. So I always say, please chime in on anything as you're going along. Um, Curriculum-based assessment results and district state assessment. This drives me crazy and I'm in education, but I always play the dumb card when I see like, when it says like I-star 420 for ELA, I-star, 220 for math. I'll say, what does that even mean? And feel free to say it too. So that section should not just have test scores. It should have when they were assessed as well. So is this from August or is this from May? Makes a huge difference. What was the assessment like? Why would a parent know what an I-star score was actually assessing? So it should explain what the assessment is, and then it should explain the results. What do these mean in comparison to the same age peers? In comparison to that child and themselves, like have they made growth? Have they taken it before? So really kind of push with getting some explanation. The next section, and this is all still in section 7. They don't have these numbers. I'm so sorry. I should have probably not put numbers. So section 7, the relevant trend, I'm sorry, the present levels doesn't have these numbers 1 through 10. So I'm getting a mental note, take those off if I use this training again. But they're just kind of highlighted sections. So developmental and functional is where all the related service providers put information except for speech because they have their own little section. And this is how CPS is organized. But this is where like an OT, a physical therapist, a social worker, they're going to put that. But this is also for the classroom to talk about how they function throughout the school and the classroom, maybe independent living skills, things like that. And then the communication needs is really the speech therapist mostly, but the classroom can also add stuff. The teachers can also say like, in class he uses 1 to 2 word phrases, or in class he's very verbal, or in class he uses his AAC device, um, that kind of stuff. And then the relevant transition needs, that again is a CPS specific section, but that really talks about this is where I was talking about where you will find some schools will accidentally put in the child will be in such and such class. Like that hasn't been determined yet. So this section should not have that in the draft. But this talks about multiple things. How do they transition within in a classroom, within a school building? And then what will it take for your child to be in a less restrictive environment? Um, and that would be should be in that section. Language and cultural considerations are kind of if there's any cultural or language barriers that might need to be considered or supported. And then that parent concerns input. And that's why it's right there, because because everything above is present levels, what's going on. Everything next is that prescription of education. How are we meeting the needs? So this is super important. And let's say you gave it to them ahead of time. That doesn't mean they shouldn't read it. Like they should read it because you want everyone at the team to hear it, to know, hey, we're going to consider this throughout the IEP. Yeah, so this next little part is everything we just talked about drives everything, accommodations, goals, and services. If it didn't happen in this section, it technically shouldn't happen. Like if you have an IEP goal, let's say for reading comprehension, and in this section, they didn't talk about anything about reading comprehension. There's a huge disconnect, right? So when I do training for teachers, I split the IEP. I give one group the accommodations, one group the goals, and one group the section 7. And I have the people with section 7 read out stuff and highlight it. And then I say, all right, who's got the who's got something that that connects with that, right? Do you have an accommodation? Great. Okay, cross that out. Do you have a goal? Great, cross that out. And it really teaches them to see how everything is connected. Um, yeah, so some questions that you can keep in mind for this section. I know I'm drilling this section down, this poor section. Saying stuff like, how are they functioning? How are they performing? What are their strengths in each subject? What are their deficits? How is the disability impacting their performance? What supports and strategies are they using currently that are working? And we're going to recommend continuing. And maybe what stuff's not working. Maybe they were using a timer and this child melts down every time they see the timer. That's great to put in there because remember, writing it as if they're moving tomorrow. If I'm the new teacher, I might say, ooh, I'm going to try a timer. And then he melts down. But if I had it in there, like we tried timers multiple times, this is not a strategy that works for him. Um, and all staff should really have input into that section. Very specific, referencing data, test results, stick to the facts, right? Oh, and this is kind of newer in Illinois. They really want you to write, if you have a specific learning disability, there are 8 categories in Illinois under specific learning disability. So they really want you to indicate which ones, because what happens is CPS's IEP only just says specific learning disability. Well, if you qualified for math calculation, written expression, and reading comprehension, but it's not written anywhere there. There is a good chance a goal could fall off, a service can fall off because no one's connecting it to which specific learning disability they qualified for. I would also say the same for OHI, indicating how did they qualify for that? Did they qualify for that because of ADHD, some sensory processing, and then ED as well? That means emotional disability in the state of Illinois. So really making sure they outline in the IEP what specifically those eligibility categories are. Now, in Illinois, we have what's called the autism considerations if the child has an autism eligibility label. Um, and it really is, it was designed to make sure that we're really looking at anything possible on the autism spectrum, all the areas that could be impacted by their autism, and making sure that we're effectively designing supports to address all areas. So these are the areas. So the first one is the verbal, nonverbal communication needs of the child. So these are some of the things that this section might have. My lighting person is just setting up my lighting. I don't know if you can tell. um so these are the things that they should be addressing. Now, on the CPS IEP, you have to write, is it relevant or not relevant for your particular child? So are any of these things relevant? Anything about their communication style should be written in here, and any needs they have. And what this section, this autism consideration section says is, if it's relevant and they wrote why, then something in the IEP needs to address it. So the next one is the need to develop social interaction skills. Same thing. This is all about how your child socializes, how they do socially. And it's more than just like peer to peer. It could be with staff, it could be in small groups and large groups, it could be just their pragmatic skills. So that section would address, is it relevant for your particular child? And then if so, what are the needs? There's the sensory one. Again, kind of thinking of all of the senses. I just put a few here, but there's also vestibular, and there's also proprioceptive. So really thinking about those are like the movement and the awareness of body and space. So how is your child's sensory system affected by their autism? And making sure we're addressing that. The next one is the needs resulting from resistance to environmental change or change in daily routine. Many, but of course not all, do have challenges with change in routine. So we often see this being something that affects a lot of our children, but this is where we'd want to write it and make sure it's addressed throughout the IEP as well. We're almost done with the considerations. So the needs resulting from engagement in repetitive activities and stereotype movements. So these are any of those stereotype movements that your child might be participating in, and then how might it affect their education, and what can we do to help support that? That's what that section is for. And then we have the behavioral intervention strategies and supports. If the IEP team thinks that the behaviors are more intense and really are affecting the academic performance of the child or that of their peers, they might do a behavior intervention plan or a functional behavior analysis. But this section in the autism considerations can be more of the, needs enforcement system, needs of first then language, and like more kind of the autism behaviors that can be just supported through some of that. Now, section in CPS section 9 is called the area of needs. Those are where you're going to see 3 columns of needs, and then each one has 2 check boxes. You can check a goal or it says A&M, which for parents, let me tell you, that means accommodations and modifications. So if you see a goal checked, so this is kind of a little trick of the trade, even though you're not going to get the minutes in the draft, if you see a goal checked, you at least know you're going to have minutes, because the only way to have minutes is to have a goal. So if you see a goal for, communication, they're going to have speech minutes. If you see a goal for independent functioning, that one's a little bit harder because sometimes OTs put their minutes there and their goals, but sometimes it literally just means independent functioning within your class. And then the second boxes are for accommodations. My gut is that Sometimes you guys might see that those specials classes, music, art, things like that, they forget to check the accommodations. And not only do they forget to check them, but they just bring the kid to the music class, to the art class, and they're just kind of there. And I call it, got to bring their bag of tricks. Whatever's working for them in their special ed class, or even in their gen ed class that's co-taught, you need to take those supports into music, into art, into P, whether it's a reinforcement system, a koosh ball, a weighted vest, whatever it is, those should be brought with and utilized in these specials classes as well. Okay, so these are the accommodations. This is an accommodation is how do we level the playing field? Right? So it's not changing the content, it's not changing the expectations. I'll give you some examples. Well, these are the areas we can look at, like how they respond to something. Like, for example, for response, like I'm not changing the outcome, but if maybe all the other kids have to write an answer, maybe that child does it verbally. So they still have the same thing they're being asked to do, but they could do it verbally. Timing, maybe I have an extended time. Scheduling, maybe it's broken up into multiple times. Let's see, I think, yeah, here's some extra time, breaks, a special keyboard, reading a test out loud, preferred seating, graphic organizers, sensory materials. All these are accommodations. These things can be provided to your child to help even the playing field. Modifications are really how do we change the playing field? So maybe the expectations different or the requirements of the task. So maybe I only have to do 5 out of the 20 math problems. Maybe I'm using a different curriculum. I'll show you some examples. Oh, well, so here are things that can be modified. So assignments, homework, curriculum. So maybe they have a different grading scale. Maybe they have shortened assignments, different texts, different curriculum. Those are all actual modifications. Section 11 for CPS is the goals, but all IEPs have goals. These are connected to all direct service minutes. If you have minutes, you must have a goal. Okay. And all goals need to be tied to a deficit. My biggest pet peeve in Chicago public schools, if your child is in a cluster program or in special ed for all 4 core academics, CPS writes a goal for science and social studies. They are the only district in the entire state of Illinois that does that. They do it for accountability. So I get what they're saying. They want to say, I want that science teacher to have a goal. They need to be working on something. They're totally right. The problem is what they're writing. Your child doesn't have a science deficit. Your child doesn't have a social studies deficit. Your child's reason for being in special ed, if they are for science and social studies, would be based on maybe a reading deficit, maybe a comprehension deficit, maybe an attention deficit. So the goals, even though it says science on their label, because that's for accountability, the science teacher has to do that, should be always tied to the deficit. So I could have a science goal that talks about attending, or task completion or comprehension. So keep that in mind. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. If you ever need help how to word that, just let me know. So, goals, like why do we have these goals, right? We need to make sure that we are providing the same opportunities as our gen ed students through state standards and Common Core. We need to be able to monitor our progress to know, are we what we're doing, is it working? If we don't have goals and we are not monitoring them, how do we know what we're doing is working? And we want to make sure we're reporting that to parents to show authentic growth. And the goals have to be SMART. So SMART, SMART, is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So it doesn't mean the goal, if they're not smart, they're dumb. You didn't hear that from me, but I had a case manager complain that I called their goals dumb because I said they weren't SMART goals. But everyone in the education field should know what a SMART goal is because the state requires all goals to be SMART. So if you can't act it out, if you can't visualize exactly what it's saying, it's probably not a SMART goal. So it needs to be detailed, well defined. There has to be a way to measure it. It has to be attainable for that particular child, realistic. And then the timing thing is simple because IEP goals are written for 1 year, and then the benchmarks have the dates on them. I use the stranger test. If I'm a teacher, I have someone read my goal and say, "Do you know what that means? Can you act it out?" But as a parent at a meeting, you can say, "What does that mean?" My favorite thing is I say, "What do they have to do to demonstrate mastery? What does mastery look like? I'm not sure." So that can either, if it forces them to explain it to you, then here's my answer to that. Ooh, then can you write that? Because if you don't understand it by how it's written, then it's not a SMART goal, in my opinion. And goals are the instructional roadmap to their learning, so they're super important. I did talk about this, that it is annually, and we want to show progress, individualize. Oh, and please don't let them copy goals from year to year. Um, because if they're copying a goal and doing the same thing, then whatever they're doing isn't working. So they need to do something more different, right? Um, so this is kind of the science social studies thing I was saying. So IEP goals are not written about mastering content or curriculum. It's really what's that deficit and how are we moving them forward with the deficit. So if you see a social studies goal like about, oh, we'll identify US president and the governmental blah blah blah. No, he doesn't have, does he have a disability in that? No, it might be of comprehension, it might be of, written expression. So that's probably something that many schools struggle with. And making sure they're measurable. Saying improving your social skills tells me nothing. So saying they'll understand, saying they'll know, saying they'll grasp, saying they'll identify, like, we need it to be something we can hang our hat on, right? How are they going to show me? How are they going to identify? Identify verbally? Okay, then that's observable. I'm going to tell you. Identify by circling something? That is. So we really want to make sure there's some way to measure it. And this is kind of a joke in the field of educators. The legendary every goal has to be written for 80%. Obviously that's not true because we wouldn't want this poor child to have a goal to cross the street 80% accurately, because what would happen the other 20%? So when you're in the meeting, feel free to say, how's this data collected? Who's collecting it? They'll automatically mark like quarterly. They just mark it that way in CPS. You could say, I want data collected. Like if it's a reading comprehension goal, I'm going to say I want weekly data. I want weekly. If it's a behavioral goal, I want daily. So they'll try to kind of put that under, kind of slide that in. But I definitely ask for that. And you can ask for raw data too. You can ask to see the data. And, each goal has those benchmarks, like how are we going to work our way up to the goal? They also should be SMART. Some of the things to remember and kind of keep in mind is you don't want to see the same goals. Um, again, if it's not working, what can we do more or different? Every goal has to be measurable. Every service has to have a goal. Progress monitoring, you really want the data on that goal, on all the goals. And a phrase I use is a measurable goal. Even if you wrote it measurably, I love it. It's it's really useless 100% of the time if you're actually not measuring it, if you're actually not taking the data. Um, 12 in CPS is the minutes. Some people call this the grid page, the LRE page. So this is, are we going to provide service in those areas in section 9 that we checked? And are we going to do it, another police, sorry, in the gen ed environment or outside of the gen ed environment? And outside means in special ed, a special ed environment. It basically means not in the general ed. Consultation minutes will also be listed and they're like right below the grid. And again, none of this should be on the draft. Um, and if it is, feel free to have them note that in the notes section because you never know when you need a good gem in your back pocket. Related services. Um, so there is a huge difference between school-based related services and clinically based related services. You know what people don't know, not even some of the educators? School-based related services are for the child to help the child benefit from their special ed services. You would think it would be so they can access general ed. That's what special ed is for. Special ed is to help the child to access gen ed. Related services is to help them to benefit from those special ed. So that's one difference. The other difference is it's about access and it's about yeah, it's like accessing their educational environment. So the easiest one to explain is physical therapy. You might get physical therapy outside of school to strengthen core muscles, to strengthen things. But if you can walk to your class, sit in your chair, and walk out, you're not going to get physical therapy in school 99.99% of the time. So we really have to think about, can they access their educational environment and their special education? So it is a lot different. Let me see. Before the meeting, review the draft, highlight as mentioned, prepare your parent comments, concerns, input, prepare any questions. Ooh, ask for the related service logs. That's a newer law too. You can ask for them. You don't ask for them at the table because it's too hard to get them like on the fly, but ask for them like a week before or so. You can ask for them whenever you want, but they're always really good to look at prior to the meeting. Are they getting the related services they're supposed to? Are they on a consistent schedule? Because we know for our children on the spectrum, you need to keep that schedule as consistent as possible. So you can ask for those. Now, during the meeting, always feel comfortable to ask a question. There is no dumb question ever. Because if you have a question, something is not clear. And you know what I say, you got to write that IEP like you're moving tomorrow. So it should be very, very clear. Provide your input, feel empowered to ask questions, to share your experiences about your own child, either with doing homework or just in life in general. At the end of the IEP, there's something called an IEP notes page. A lot of case managers drop the ball and they forget to fill it out. I like to say at the beginning of the meeting, oh, just wondering who's taking the IEP notes? Because it is really important, especially if there's something you're asking for that maybe the team doesn't believe should happen or vice versa. It's captured in the notes, which really is important. Um, Now, I know some of you are not going to like this, but the law actually says you're supposed to get the final IEP at the conclusion of the IEP meeting. There's not this, well, let me look at it before I say you can finalize it or before I say I'll sign it. Remember, signing doesn't say anything. Legally, they are supposed to press final and give you that IEP right there at the meeting. And if it's virtual, they're supposed to email it to you right away. Um, so that is the legal now, but you can get it and say, oh, you know what? We talked about updating that math goal and I see they forgot to do it. Hey, we're all human. Maybe they really did because they're doing it on the fly. So you could just email the case manager and say, remember we talked about updating the math goal? It didn't get done. So they can revise that. After the meeting, review it, make sure everything's accurate. Feel free to email the case manager anything that's not accurate. Any questions lingering, reach out to the case manager and really keep all your IEPs. I always say that's fine if they want to give you a printed one, but I always say also get them to email it because then you get to play Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You can email a friend, you can show a friend, you can Google search. It's just nice to have it electronically too. Um, so I'm not going to go into length about this, but I just want to give you the quick and dirty about IEP versus 504. So they start out with the same questions. Does your child have a disability? Yes or no? So I'm going to say autism. Yes. Great. Move on to number two. Does the disability adversely affect the student's ability to make progress in general ed? Yes or no? I'm going to say, yep, still does. But here's the kicker. Does the child require specially designed instruction, in other words, a special ed teacher, to make progress in general ed? The actual specially designed instruction, yes or no? If the answer is no, they can still then get a 504. Those are those accommodations and modifications. There are kids with autism on the high end of the spectrum who really have been really successful with 504s. So it's just something to keep in mind. I don't want to belabor on it, but it is definitely something. Here's some more information about that. And then I just wanted to share my information. I'm going to uh let's see. I am going to stop sharing to see if anyone has a question. I talk a lot and I talk fast, and I'm so sorry. But I hope it was useful information.